A genealogist thought the single white rose on a 150-year-old grave was a strange tribute. He soon learned it wasn't a tribute at all, but a warning meant just for him. Welcome to Echoed Chronicles. Our story tonight is about a man whose quiet, solitary work brought him to a town with a secret it would do anything to protect. The project was the kind genealogists dream of, not because of fame or a dramatic public revelation, but because of its purity. A wealthy, intensely private client named Ms. Althea Finch wanted her family tree traced back to its roots in the iron-rich soil of central Pennsylvania, and she was willing to pay for precision. No digital shortcuts, no reliance on third-party databases that were often riddled with errors. She wanted boots on the ground, hands on stone, and eyes on original yellow documents. For a man like me, Elias Thorne, it was a commission of profound satisfaction. My work had always been a quiet affair, a dialogue with the dead conducted through faded ink and eroded granite. It had taken me from the salt-sprayed churchyards of coastal Maine to the dusty archives of New Orleans. This time, it brought me to Blackwood Creek, Pennsylvania, a town nestled so deep in a fold of the Allegheny Mountains that it seemed to have been misplaced by the modern world. The drive-in was a descent. After exiting I-80, I followed a succession of state routes that grew narrower and more winding, the trees crowding in on either side of the asphalt. The air grew cooler, thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. Blackwood Creek announced itself not with a sign, but with a sudden clearing, a handful of stone and timber buildings, a gas station with a single, humming pump, and a general store whose porch sagged with the weight of a century. My base of operations was the Creekside Motel, a single-story C-shaped building with a flickering neon sign that simply said Motel in pale blue. It was clean, smelled of pine cleaner and old coffee, and the silence at night was absolute. The heart of my project was St. Jude's Rest, the town's original cemetery. It sat on a low hill overlooking the creek, a sprawling 5-acre plot of land crowded with leaning headstones. Some were simple slate markers, their inscriptions scrubbed nearly smooth by 200 years of wind and rain. Others were more ornate, marble angels with missing fingers and granite obelisks greened with lichen. The cemetery was bordered on 3 sides by a low, crumbling stone wall and on the 4th by a dense, dark forest of hemlock and oak. For the first 3 days, the work was bliss. I was the only living soul there, save for the crows that complained from the treetops. I set up my grid, cross-referencing my client's sparse records with a master map I'd obtained from the county clerk. I spent my hours on my knees in the damp grass, cleaning the faces of stones with a soft bristled brush and water, using a large mirror to redirect the autumn sunlight into the faint grooves of worn lettering. The names I was searching for were Cadwallader and Price, the founding families of the area, whose lines Miss Finch believed she descended from. I found them quickly, a cluster of graves in the oldest section, their markers dark and heavy. I fell into a rhythm. Mornings in the cemetery, afternoons in the town hall's musty records room, and evenings back at the motel, collating my findings on my laptop. The silence of the place was a balm. The air was crisp. The work was progressing. It was perfect. The first discordant note came on the 4th morning. It was a Thursday. I was examining the headstone of a Hezekiah Cadwallader, died 1847. The stone was a simple, rounded slab of slate, tilted forward at a precarious angle. The day before, I had spent an hour carefully cleaning it, removing a thick blanket of moss to reveal the faint inscription. It was just another stone among hundreds. But this morning, resting at its base, was a single perfect white rose. It was jarring. The flower was fresh, its petals still holding the morning dew. There were no other flowers in the entire cemetery. No plastic bouquets, no faded silk arrangements. Just this one stark white rose against the dark, wet earth. My first thought was practical, a local, someone visiting a long-dead ancestor. It was strange, given Hezekiah had been in the ground for over a century and a half, but not impossible. Some families hold long traditions. I noted it in my logbook, a simple clinical observation, and tried to put it out of my mind. But the next day, Friday, it was there again. A new rose in the exact same spot. The one from the day before was gone. I walked the perimeter of the cemetery, looking for footprints in the soft ground near the wall, but found nothing distinct. The grass was too thick, too matted with fallen leaves. I felt a prickle of unease, a sense of intrusion. My quiet, solitary workplace had a visitor, one with a precise and inscrutable ritual. The disturbance was minor, but it had shifted something in the atmosphere. The silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt watchful. The rustle of leaves in the wind sounded like footsteps. When a branch snapped in the woods behind the cemetery wall, I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. There was nothing there, just the deep, dark woods. On Saturday, I decided to arrive earlier than usual, hoping to catch the person leaving the flower. The sun had not yet crested the ridge when I pulled my Ford Escape onto the gravel patch by the cemetery gate. The air was cold and sharp. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, sipping coffee from a thermos, my eyes fixed on the Cadwallader plot. No one came. Finally, unable to wait any longer, I got out and walked to the gravesite. The rose was already there, pristine and white, a single drop of water sliding from a petal onto the stone. They had come and gone before dawn. This felt different. This was not a simple act of remembrance. It was deliberate, and the timing felt aimed at me. It was a message, but I had no idea what it was trying to say. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The image of the rose, stark and out of place, was burned into my mind. It was the first crack in the foundation of my carefully constructed solitude. The real shift came on Monday. The weekend had been uneventful. No rose on Sunday, which I found odder than its appearance. But on Monday morning, I went straight to Hezekiah's grave. No rose. A wave of relief washed over me so profound it surprised me. Perhaps the strange ritual was over. I could get back to work. My task for the day was to make rubbings of the Cadwallader and Price headstones. It was a delicate process. I taped a large sheet of thin, resilient paper over the inscription and rubbed it with a heel ball, a hard wax crayon. The raised letters of the stone are captured in relief on the paper. I started with Hezekiah's and worked my way through the family plot. I was absorbed, the familiar, rhythmic scrape of wax on paper soothing my nerves. I finished the Cadwallader plot and moved on to the Prices, a few yards away. Took me a little over 2 hours. When I was done, I packed up my rubbings and tools, and as I stood to leave, I glanced back at the Cadwallader plot. My breath hitched. Propped against Hezekiah's headstone, in the exact spot where the roses had been, was one of my tools. It was a small trowel I used for clearing turf from the base of markers. I never used it near the Cadwallader stones. The ground was clear there. I always kept it in the outside pocket of my canvas satchel, which had been sitting by the Price plot, a good 30 feet away. I knew with absolute certainty that I had not put it there. I stood frozen, scanning the tree line, the road, the rows of silent stones. The cemetery was empty, but it wasn't. Someone had walked over to my bag, taken my trowel, and placed it there while my back was turned, while I was completely engrossed in my work. They had been close. They had watched me. The silence that rushed in to fill the space was heavy, charged with a presence I could not see. The crows in the trees were silent. The wind had died. There was only the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears. I grabbed the trowel, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The metal was cold, colder than the air. I shoved it into my satchel, not bothering to put it in its pocket, the dirt on its blade smearing against my clean paper rubbings. I didn't care. My only thought was to get away. I threw the rest of my equipment into the bag, my movements clumsy and loud in the oppressive silence. Every few seconds I jerked my head up, scanning the perimeter, expecting to see a figure standing there, watching me from behind a weathered obelisk. But there was nothing, only the stones and the trees, silent witnesses. The walk back to my car was the longest of my life. I felt 1,000 unseen eyes on my back. I didn't run, forcing myself into a brisk, determined walk. Running felt like surrender. Running would be a performance for whoever was watching. I fumbled with my keys, the metallic jingle echoing unnaturally in the quiet. The car door slammed shut with a sound like a gunshot. I locked the doors, started the engine, and didn't look back as I sped away from St. Jude's Rest. Back in the sterile quiet of my motel room, the fear began to curdle into a low, simmering anger. I was a professional doing a job. Who had the right to terrorize me like this? I paced the short length of the room, from the window with its cheap polyester curtains to the bathroom door. It was a prank. It had to be. Some local teenager with a twisted sense of humor, getting kicks out of spooking the outsider. But the precision of it all gnawed at me. The white roses, the timing, the trowel. It wasn't random vandalism. It was calculated. It was intimate. They had taken something of mine. They had been close enough to hear the scrape of my heel ball on the paper. I pulled the curtains shut, plunging the room into a dim, stuffy twilight. The Creekside Motel, once a haven of quiet anonymity, now felt like a trap. Every creak of the building, every car that passed on the road outside, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I sat on the edge of the bed, my report for Miss Finch open on my laptop screen, but the names and dates were just a meaningless jumble. Hezekiah Cadwallader, born 1798, died 1847. He wasn't just a data point anymore. He was the epicenter of this bizarre, silent assault. My genealogist's mind, trained to follow threads back in time, kicked in. The threat was human, and humans have motives. The motive was clearly connected to my work. Someone did not want me digging into the Cadwallader family history. Why? What secret could a family dead for over 100 years possibly hold that was worth protecting with this kind of psychological warfare? The next morning, I didn't go to the cemetery. The very thought of it filled me with a cold dread. Instead, I drove to the Blackwood Creek Town Hall, a stout brick building with a small, manicured lawn. The records room was run by a woman named Carol, who looked to be in her late 60s. She had a mountain of white hair pinned in a complicated bun and peered at me over a pair of half-moon glasses. She remembered me from the previous week. "Back for more, Mr. Thorne?" she asked, her voice raspy but kind. "Thought you'd be up on the hill, communing with the dead. Taking a break from the damp," I said, forcing a smile. I was hoping to look at something a little more recent today. Property deeds, tax records, from, say, the last 50 years or so. "Oh, moving from the 1800s to the modern era, are we?" She chuckled. "Anything in particular?" This was the delicate part. "Just following a few lines forward." I lied. "The Cadwallader name, and the prices. I'm curious to see if any branches of the family remained in the area." Carol's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. She took off her glasses and began cleaning them with the hem of her cardigan. "You won't find any prices. The last of them moved out to Ohio after the war. The second one, but the Cadwalladers, that's a different story." She led me to a series of tall, metal filing cabinets. The main line died out, same as the prices, but there was a branch, a cousin line. They never had much. Lived on the edge of town, up toward the old quarry. Kept to themselves, mostly. She pulled open a heavy drawer labeled CD. Last one I knew of was a man named Silas Cadwallader. He passed on, must be 10, 15 years ago now. A bit of a town character. Lived in the old family homestead his whole life. Never married, no children. "So the line ended with him?" I asked, feeling a strange mix of disappointment and relief. "As far as anyone knows," she said, her voice dropping a little. "He had a younger brother, but he left. Long time ago. Something bad happened. Folks don't talk about it much." She tapped a thick manila folder. "Silas's will and testament is in here. Left everything to the state, what little there was. The house is still standing, I think. Empty. The woods are taking it back." I spent the next 2 hours poring over the file. It was just as she said. Silas Cadwallader, last of his name in Blackwood Creek, died in 2008. The file contained a grainy photocopy of his driver's license. A thin, grim-faced man with deep-set eyes and a hard mouth. He looked like a man who had been carved from the same unforgiving rock as the mountains around him. There was no mention of the brother. I thanked Carol and left, my mind spinning. A dead end. If the last Cadwallader died over a decade ago, who was putting roses on a grave? Who was moving my tools? A distant relative I couldn't trace? A history buff with a proprietary feeling about the town's founders? It made no sense. As I walked back to my car, parked on the quiet street in front of the town hall, my eyes caught something on the windshield. It was tucked under the driver's side wiper blade. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a ticket. It was a small, folded piece of paper. My hand trembled as I picked it up. It was heavy, expensive-feeling stock, not notebook paper. I unfolded it. There were no words, just a charcoal drawing, done with a rough but skillful hand. It was a detailed sketch of a headstone. Not just any headstone. It was Hezekiah Cadwallader's, the simple, rounded slate slab, tilted at its precarious angle. In the drawing, at the base of the stone was a single, perfect white rose. And leaning against it was a small, unmistakable trowel. It was a picture of the scene I had discovered yesterday. A receipt for my fear. I looked around wildly. The street was empty except for a pickup truck rumbling past. An old woman was sweeping her porch 2 houses down. No one was looking at me. No one seemed out of place. But they were here. They had watched me go into the town hall. They had walked up to my car in broad daylight and left this. The message was clear. I see you. I know what you saw. The game was escalating, and I was the only other player. The drawing was a declaration of war. A quiet, psychological war, but a war nonetheless. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but the drawing had crystallized it into something else. Resolve. I was not going to be chased out of town by charcoal sketches and misplaced garden tools. I was a researcher. My entire career was built on finding people who did not want to be found. This person, this ghost in the machine of Blackwood Creek, had made a critical error. They had given me a new thread to pull. My first stop was back at the town hall. Carol was locking up for the day, pulling a heavy wooden door shut. She saw the look on my face and her hand paused on the key. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice low, "you look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," I answered, holding out the folded piece of paper. "Someone left this on my car." She took it reluctantly, as if it might burn her. She unfolded it, and her eyes, magnified by her glasses, widened. She let out a small, sharp breath. "Oh, my heavens!" She looked from the drawing to me, a deep concern etched into the lines around her eyes. "This is not some childish prank." "No," I agreed. "It's not. You mentioned Silas Cadwallader had a brother. One who left after something bad happened. Carol, I think this is connected. I think he might still be here. I need to know what happened." She chewed on her lower lip, her gaze distant. She seemed to be debating with herself. "It was a long time ago," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "before I was even working here. His name was Micah. He was younger than Silas by a good 10 years. Artistic, quiet, drew all the time. Everyone thought he was a bit odd, but harmless." She leaned against the stone doorframe, the evening light casting long shadows across the street. Then, one autumn, a boy from town went missing. A teenager, name of Danny Putnam. They searched for weeks. The whole town, the state police. Nothing. He was just gone. My blood ran cold. This was it. The secret. "There were whispers," Carol continued, her voice strained. "Danny was last seen up near the old quarry, the same place the Cadwallader boys used to roam. People started looking at Micah differently. The quiet one, the artist. He always carried a sketchbook. Maybe he drew something he shouldn't have seen. Or maybe—" She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the cool air. There was no proof. Nothing. But the suspicion was thick enough to choke on. A few weeks later, Micah disappeared, too. Most people assumed he ran, that he had something to do with it. Silas never spoke of him again. He just walled himself off, became the bitter old man everyone remembers. And the boy, Danny Putnam? He was never found. Carol shook her head slowly. Never. It's a weight this town still carries. She gave me directions to the old Cadwallader homestead. It wasn't on any map. Follow the quarry road until it turns to dirt, she'd said. About a mile after that, look for a deer trail on the left marked by a rotted fence post. The house is a quarter-mile down that trail. But Mr. Thorne, she had added, placing a hand on my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Be careful. Some things are better left buried. The drive was tense. The quarry road was a pitted, crumbling strip of asphalt that soon devolved into a muddy track. My escape handled it, but every splash of mud on the undercarriage sounded like an explosion. I found the fence post, nearly swallowed by overgrown blackberry bushes, and parked the car. The woods here were different, thicker, darker. The air was heavy and still. The trail was barely visible, a faint parting in the undergrowth. I pushed through tangled branches and wet ferns, my heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. After a 10-minute walk that felt like an hour, I saw it. The house was a collapsed lung, a 2-story frame building, its back roof caved in, its windows dark, empty sockets. Gray, weathered siding was peeling off in long strips, but it wasn't entirely derelict. A thin plume of smoke, almost invisible against the gray sky, curled from a rust-eaten stovepipe jutting from the one section of the roof that remained intact. Someone was living here. My courage almost failed me. I could turn back, get in my car, and drive until Blackwood Creek was just a bad memory. But the drawing in my pocket felt like a stone, a weight of unanswered questions. I crept closer, my feet silent on the pine needles. I peered through a grimy window into what must have been the living room. The space was Spartan. A simple cot, a stack of books, a small wood-burning stove, and on the walls, pinned everywhere, were charcoal drawings. Dozens of them. There were sketches of the woods, of deer, of the crows in the trees. And there were sketches of St. Jude's Rest. My stomach dropped. I saw a drawing of the cemetery gate, a drawing of the Price family obelisk, and then a series that made my skin crawl. It was me, a sketch of me on my knees, cleaning a headstone, a sketch of me back turned, making a rubbing, a sketch of my car parked by the road. He had been watching me from the very beginning, a silent, unseen observer documenting my every move. And then I saw it on a small makeshift table next to the stove, a pad of expensive, heavy stock paper and a set of charcoal pencils. Next to it, a single perfect white rose stood in a glass jar of water. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, my heart seizing in my chest. A man stood at the edge of the clearing, not 10 feet away. He was tall and gaunt, with the same deep-set eyes and hard mouth as the man in the driver's license photo, but his face was weathered by decades of solitude, not bitterness. His hair was long and gray, tied back with a leather cord. It was Micah Cadwallader. In his hand, he held a small, freshly dug bundle of wildflowers. We stood there for a long moment, frozen in a silent tableau. He didn't look angry. He looked tired, resigned. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice a dry rustle, like leaves skittering across pavement. It was the voice of a man who rarely used it. "You didn't give me a choice," I replied, my own voice shaky. "The roses, the trowel, the drawing. What do you want?" He gestured with his head toward the cemetery, back in the direction I'd come. "I want you to leave them be." "The Cadwalladers? I'm just a genealogist. I'm documenting a family history." A flicker of pain crossed his face. "You're not documenting history. You're disturbing a grave." He took a step closer, and I instinctively tensed. "Not his," he said, nodding toward the house. "Not Hezekiah's. His stone is just a marker, a landmark." His eyes held mine, and in them I saw a profound, ancient sadness. "That boy, Danny Putnam, he didn't run away, and I didn't hurt him." He paused, swallowing hard. "It was my brother, Silas. He had a temper, a darkness in him. They had an argument, up at the quarry. It was an accident, a push, a fall. The story tumbled out of him, a torrent of words held back for 40 years. Silas, terrified and panicked, had come to him for help. Together, in the dead of night, they had carried the boy's body to the one place no one would ever think to look. They buried him in St. Jude's Rest, in an empty patch of ground just beside the old, tilted stone of their ancestor, Hezekiah Cadwallader. "I left because I couldn't live here with that secret," Micah whispered, his eyes fixed on something far away. "But I couldn't stay away. This is my home. Silas is my blood. I came back after he died, to watch, to make sure he rests in peace." The roses weren't for Hezekiah. They were for Danny Putnam. The trowel was a warning. My methodical work, my cleaning and measuring, was getting too close to the unmarked soil. I was the threat. "I'm the only one who knows," he said. "The only one left to keep watch. I just want him to be left alone, to let the ground lie still." I looked at this man, this hermit who had sacrificed his life to stand guard over his brother's terrible secret. He wasn't a monster. He was a keeper of a tomb, an artist whose subject was grief. He had tried to warn me, to scare me away with his silent, strange language of flowers and drawings. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the charcoal sketch he had left on my car, and held it out to him. "Your work is very good," I said quietly. He took it, his long, calloused fingers brushing mine. He looked down at the drawing, then back up at me. There was an understanding in his gaze, a plea. I didn't need to say anything else. My work in Blackwood Creek was done. I could build Miss Finch's family tree without this final, terrible branch. The official record would show that the Cadwallader line ended with Silas, that Micah was lost to time. The truth would remain here, in the cold Pennsylvania soil, guarded by a ghost who was still very much alive. I gave him a slight nod, a concession. I turned and walked away, back down the trail, leaving him standing there in the twilight, a silent sentinel at the edge of the encroaching woods. I didn't look back. I got in my car, drove out of the forest, and left Blackwood Creek in my rearview mirror. I sent my report to Ms. Althea Finch a week later. She was delighted with the detail. She never knew how much I had left out.